The protagonist kidnaps his ex from her wedding after finding out that he has a fatal brain tumor. The story begins with Heijo, the main character, lying on the snow, realizing that now is the time for his death. Meanwhile, Jae-mi, the female lead, is rushing toward him, her cries shattering the silence. This moment foreshadows Heijo's struggles, but before the stillness of the scene settles too deeply, the drama shifts to the present, where Heijo's life is anything but peaceful. His world is filled with chaos, starting with his unconventional job, fulfilling unusual wishes with his partner Yu-Ji-ho. In a small, cramped flat, Heijo busies himself in his little aquarium, separating dead fish with a resigned expression. The serenity of the task is short-lived when a sharp knock interrupts the Juri. The fiery landlady is at the door, demanding to be let in. Heijo doesn't answer, choosing instead to hide. Meanwhile, Yu-Ji-ho, returning from an errand, spots Juri on the stairs and tries to dodge her, but she sees him anyway. Furious, she throws a sandal at him with pinpoint accuracy. Left with no choice, Yu-Ji-ho respectfully hands the sandal back, pretending not to recognize her. But Juri is not one to be fooled, and she demands access to the flat. Inside, Juri's frustration boils over when she realizes Heijo is missing. She vents her anger at Yu-Ji-ho, who tries to calm her, explaining that Heijo comes and goes as he pleases. Juri, unimpressed, delivers a final warning that they need to vacate the flat by the end of the month if Heijo doesn't cooperate. With exasperation, she suggests Heijo could even move in with her, mentioning her new king-sized bed, a comment that leaves Yu-Ji-ho stunned. Juri then inspects the couch and declares it unbearable, complaining it would ruin anyone's back if they slept on it. She marches off to deal with the union, threatening to tear down the building. When she's gone, Heijo emerges from inside the couch, grumbling about nearly suffocating. Yu-Ji-ho tells him to find a new office soon, or he might end up in Juri's bed. Heijo brushes it off with a sly remark, leaving Yu-Ji-ho curious about the relationship between Heijo and Juri. When asked, Heijo describes Juri as his mom, sister, lover, friend, boss, and landlady before casually watching her step in dog poop from the window. Shifting focus, Yu-Ji-ho checks the request board for their business. Heijo rejects most of the tasks, calling them boring until a case catches his eye. It's a plea from a mother asking them to help stop her son's bullies. Heijo accepts, but as they discuss it, Yu-Ji-ho notices another request, a desperate appeal from a little girl to find her runaway brother. Heijo coldly rejects it, insisting they don't handle missing person cases, arguing that it's the parents' responsibility to find their children. Reluctantly, Yu-Ji-ho updates their policy, though it's clear he's unsettled by Heijo's reasoning. A year-day takes an unexpected turn when a mysterious woman, Yang Hui, arrives at their shop with her gang. Yu-Ji-ho, meanwhile, finds himself in the bathroom, discovering a hefty payment of 5 million won sent by a client looking for a missing family member. Despite Heijo's stance, Yu-Ji-ho secretly decides to take on the case as a side hustle. At the same time, Heijo, now seated with his noodles, starts ignoring repeated calls from an unknown number. A text finally catches his attention. "I will kill you if you keep screening my calls." He shrugs it off, but his nonchalance is shattered when Yang Hui and her gang burst through the door, destroying his beloved fish tank. Yang Hui steps forward, demanding his attention. Yang Hui, unbothered, critiques her glasses before mocking her face. Soaked from the fish tank water, Hui pulls off his shirt and taunts her, questioning her approach to threats and violence. He tells her such methods don't work for him. Yang Hui, unfazed, smirks and reveals why she's there. She wants him to kidnap her. From her own wedding. Her request catches Hui off guard, but the audacity and drama of the idea intrigue him. He agrees immediately, much to Yu-Gi-ho's alarm. Meanwhile, Jae-mi, the bride-to-be, is blissfully unaware of the chaos brewing around her. She's shopping for a wedding ring, marveling at its history as a family heirloom passed down for 5 centuries. Her excitement grows when the shopkeeper comments on the baby she's expecting. Later, at the hospital, Jae-mi finds herself charmed by a stranger's baby while waiting for her checkup. She awkwardly compliments the baby, only to receive a blank stare in return. Flustered, she pretends to take a phone call, only for her phone to ring at that very moment. As the wedding day approaches, Heijo prepares for his mission, borrowing formal clothes from a laundromat to appear presentable. The owner warns him not to soak the clothes in blood like last time. Yu-Ji-ho, ever cautious, reminds Heijo how dangerous Yang Hui's fiancé Chil-sung is. Heijo brushes off the warnings, his mind set on the challenge. At the wedding venue, Chil-sung's older brother, who recently escaped from prison, surprises him with an emotional reunion. The brothers bond, as the younger siblings prepare a lavish display of money and gold for the bride. Yang Hui, though playing her part perfectly, signals to her assistant that she's waiting to be rescued. As the ceremony begins, Haejo makes his grand entrance, riding a motorcycle straight into the venue and performing a wheelie in front of the stunned guests. At first, the crowd mistakes it for an elaborate performance, cheering wildly. Chilsong, confused, confronts Haejo, who boldly confesses his love for the bride. Without hesitation, Haejo punches Chilsong, knocking out a tooth. The crowd's excitement turns to panic as they realize this isn't an act. But amidst the chaos, Haejo and Yang Hui jump onto the motorcycle and speed away, leaving behind a trail of stunned onlookers. As they escape, memories from Haejo's past flood his mind. He recalls being abandoned as a child, left crying on a desolate shore by parents who coldly denied he was theirs. The haunting memory distracts him, leading to a motorcycle accident that sends him to the hospital. When Haejo regains consciousness, Yu-gi-ho is by his side, holding up his middle fingers with a mischievous grin. "How many fingers?" Yugi asks, his tone teasing. Haejo, still drowsy, mutters a string of curses under his breath. The brief exchange is interrupted when Haejo inquires about Yang Hui. Yu-gi-ho reveals that she has already vanished, heading straight to the airport. It turns out the entire wedding fiasco was part of an elaborate heist, and Yang Hae had conned her fiancé out of his fortune before orchestrating the escape. As Haejo prepares to leave the hospital, the doctor stops him with a grave expression. In the consultation room, the doctor points to a CT scan of Haejo's brain. Shaking his head when it becomes clear, he explains that the blood vessels have formed a tangle of knots, restricting oxygen flow to his brain cells. The pressure will continue to rise, the doctor says, but Haejo finishes the sentence for him, until they explode just like a bomb. He asks directly, "How long do I have left?" The doctor hesitates before responding that surgery isn't an option, and Haejo likely has only 3 months to live. The news hits Haejo like a thunderclap, and the doctor adds that his rare condition is genetic. For a man who has no family left, inheriting a deadly disease from them feels like the ultimate irony. "It's not fair," Haejo mutters, more to himself than anyone else. Elsewhere in the hospital, Jae-mi is waiting for her checkup. She notices a woman holding a baby and offers her seat, enchanted by the child's innocent face. But when she compliments the baby, the little one simply stares back blankly, leaving Jae-mi flustered. To escape the awkwardness, she pretends to take a phone call, only for her phone to ring at that very moment, adding to her embarrassment. Jae-mi soon receives devastating news from her doctor. She is experiencing premature menopause. At only 28, the diagnosis feels like a cruel joke. Her anxiety spirals, and she bites her nails until one starts to bleed. As the doctor tends to her injury, Jae-mi blurts out that the baby she's supposedly carrying doesn't exist. It was all part of a plan, prepared with her fiancé to gain his family's approval for their marriage. The doctor, visibly shocked, gently informs her that having children will be nearly impossible now. The reality of her situation leaves Jae-mi reeling. Overwhelmed, Jae-mi wanders aimlessly, eventually finding herself at a funeral home. There, she breaks down in tears, pouring out all her frustration and sadness. A woman she had encountered earlier, the one with the baby, approaches her again and offers tissues. The woman soon steps aside to take a phone call, handing her baby to Jae-mi. As she speaks with her husband, she complains about how this baby, their 7th, is supposed to be the last, only to find out she's pregnant with twins. Jae-mi listens silently, patting the baby to calm its cries. When the woman returns, Jae-mi, half joking, half desperate, asks if she can keep one of the children. The woman laughs nervously at first, but grows uneasy as Jae-mi refuses to let go of the baby. Eventually, the woman retrieves her child, and Jae-mi collapses onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. In her despair, she blurts out her condition. Her voice echoes through the room, drawing the attention of everyone around her. After venting her pain, Jae-mi steps out into the rain, hoping it will wash away the evidence of her tears. She is startled when a tall man suddenly approaches her, silently offering an umbrella. The stranger's quiet presence is oddly comforting, and as he walks away, she feels a strange pull. She chases after him, but all she sees is his retreating figure, dressed in a dark coat and hat. Unbeknownst to her, it was Haejo, offering her a fleeting moment of solace. Walking through the rain, Haejo is consumed by memories of Jae-mi. He recalls their happier times together, how she would cling to him like a lifeline. As a child starved of parental love, Jae-mi had always dreamed of becoming a mother and creating the family she never had. But those dreams had faded. He remembers her parting words, a curse that he would live a lonely life and die alone. Meanwhile, Chilsong discovers that his assets have vanished, stolen by Yang Hae. Furious, he swears revenge on the woman who played him and the man who helped her escape. In his rage, he turns on his younger brother, the talkative one who had unintentionally aided Yang Hae's plans. Chilsong stares at a photo of the woman he secretly loved, plotting his next move. Back in his cramped flat, Hajo spends time with Churi, the landlady. His mind is a whirlwind of regret and confusion as he thinks about his misfortune. Every step forward seems to lead to more heartache, and he wonders why his life has always been riddled with bad luck. Alone in his room, he lets silent tears fall. Less aware, Boom Ho Ha, a traditional Korean culinary artist, meticulously oversees the preparations for the upcoming wedding. In the kitchen, she is appalled to find her future daughter-in-law clumsily chopping vegetables. When Jae-mi cuts herself, Boom Ho-ja snaps, scolding her for being so careless while pregnant. Hae-jo is invited by a friend to eat red bean rice cakes, but the meal only reminds him of his illness. Distracting himself, he turns on the TV and watches a story about a father's unwavering love for his son. The tale moves him, and he laughs bitterly before deciding to act. He gives Yu-gi-ho his notice, sells all his belongings, and leaves without a word, leaving Yu-gi-ho stunned and worried. At the mansion, Jae-mi overhears conversations about her future mother-in-law's excitement for the baby she believes is on the way. Anxious, Jae-mi tries on a fake pregnant belly but struggles to make it look convincing. As guilt and regret creep in, she is startled by the sudden appearance of her future mother-in-law. But before Jae-mi can react, she wakes up. It was all a dream. Panicked, she packs her bags, determined to leave the mansion, but a firm hand stops her just as she reaches the door. The wedding day arrives, and Jae-mi dons a dazzling dress, waiting for her groom. But instead of the groom, Yu-hung, it is Hae-hu who strides in, exuding confidence. Her heart skips a beat as he approaches, and he whispers an offer to take her away. Nervously, Jae-mi declines, but Hae-jo presses on, revealing that he knows about her secret. "Your pregnancy is fake," he says quietly, "and you can't have children." Jae-mi freezes, her mind racing to process his words. Before she can respond, Ye-hyung enters the room. Before the events that led Hae-jo to storm Jae-mi's wedding, he visited the hospital and recounted a story that had long haunted him. He spoke of a wealthy young couple, madly in love, but the husband was diagnosed with cancer. Knowing he might face infertility due to treatments, the husband decided to freeze his sperm. 2 years later, the couple used it to have a child, and a healthy baby boy was born. For a time, they were overjoyed and showered the boy with love. But their happiness was shattered when the hospital confessed a mistake. Vial number 130 had been used instead of the husband's sperm. Unable to accept raising someone else's child, the couple abandoned the baby. Hae-jo revealed that he was vial number 137, the child left behind. What stung most wasn't the mistake itself, but the hospital's refusal to take accountability. Seething, Hae-jo stormed into the clinic of Dr. Kim D-bong, the doctor involved in the case. Armed with a baseball bat, he demanded his biological father's name. Dr. Kim, a smug man who prided himself on his education, refused, hiding behind policies that protected donor identities. With a sarcastic smile, Hae-jo called him a wicked but well-trained piece of trash, pointing out that moral responsibility had been ignored. The doctor, unbothered, compared the situation to a restaurant mistakenly serving seafood noodles instead of black bean noodles. "You apologize, refund the money, and move on," he said casually, as if a misplaced identity was no different than a wrong meal. Hae-jo's laughter echoed through the clinic, cold and sharp. He leaned in close and revealed his diagnosis: 13 tangled blood vessels in his brain, and 3 months to live. "I'm a ticking time bomb," he said, inviting the doctor to join him on his ride to the end. Faced with the chilling threat, Dr. Kim reluctantly provided the information Hae-jo wanted. With the details in hand, Hae-jo headed to Jae-mi's wedding. He arrived grinning, his heart pounding not from nerves but from the rush of impending chaos. Upon meeting Yu-hyung, Jae-mi's fiancé, Hae-jo introduced himself as her older brother from the orphanage. Lee-hyung, always eager to make connections, shook Hae-jo's hand enthusiastically, asking for advice and guidance. Hae-jo smiled, watching him closely, and began questioning what Yu-hyung loved most about Jae-mi. He probed deeper, testing whether Yu-hyung truly understood what it meant to protect her. Sensing the tension, Jae-mi grabbed Hae-jo's arm and dragged him outside. She begged him to leave her alone and let her marriage go on peacefully. But before they could finish their argument, Yu-hyung approached them, throwing his arms around Hae-jo in a friendly embrace. He promised to love and care for Jae-mi, treating her with the devotion she deserved. After Yu-hyung left, Hae-jo questioned Jae-mi if she loves him, and would he continue loving her after knowing about her menopause. In response, Jae-mi compares him with Yu-hyung, saying he is better not scared of commitment than Hae-jo. She then left him there and walked towards the ceremony hall. But Hae-jo was not letting her go this easily. He kidnapped Jae-mi on the spot, promising to return her once he was done with his business. In the commotion, the ceremonial hat fell and Jamie struggled to keep up. She accidentally hit her head on a doorway, fainting in the process. The incident was witnessed by the woman who was there to catch the bouquet chicken, who had run away previously, leading to the wedding's abrupt cancellation. At Haejo's apartment, Yu-gi-ho was crazy. He tried calling Haejo repeatedly but couldn't get through. Meanwhile, Yu-hyung's family erupted in outrage over the scandal, blaming Jamie for her actions. Hoya, Yu-hyung's mother, silenced the protest with a glare that could stop anyone in their tracks. She reminded the family of her sacrifices and warned them against questioning her authority. While chaos unfolded, Haejo was on the phone with a friend when he noticed Jamie escaping. She ran into a nearby rice paddy, trying to lose him in the muddy fields. Haejo followed, catching up to her with ease. Furious, Jamie accused him of ruining her life. Later, as they stopped at a stream to wash the mud off, Jamie's eyes fell on her embroidered shoes. The memory of the day Yu-hyung gifted them to her came rushing back. She remembered how he had held her hand, promising to chase her to the ends of the earth if she ever tried to run. For a moment, she had felt warmth and security in that promise. Suddenly, one of the shoes slipped into the stream and began floating away. Without hesitation, Jamie ran after it, desperate to retrieve the symbol of her fleeting happiness. Haejo watched her, his expression softening, before wading into the stream to help. Together, they fished out the shoe and continued their journey in silence, the weight of their emotions hanging between them like an unspoken truth. As they sat in the car, Hae-mi turned to Haejo with a mix of frustration and resignation. She asked him why he was doing all of this, but Haejo simply looked ahead, offering no answer. Instead, he reached for the radio, letting a soft melody fill the silence as they drove into the unknown. Jamie finally broke the silence, asking where they were headed and what he intended to do. When Haejo didn't answer, she sighed and pulled his jacket tighter around her shoulders, pretending to warm herself. Inside the pocket, she found her lifeline, her phone. She quickly slid it out, hiding it under the jacket as she tried to call Yu-hyung for help. But Haejo caught her plan with just a glance, his sharp eyes meeting hers in the mirror. He didn't stop her. He simply smirked as if to say, "Go ahead and try." When they stopped at a gas station, Jamie saw her chance. She excused herself to use the bathroom, but instead of returning, she struggled to climb out of a small window. After several failed attempts and scraping her arms in the process, she finally managed to squeeze through. But before she could celebrate her escape, she found herself scooped up into Haejo's arms. "Nice try," he said calmly, carrying her back to the car like a runaway child. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Yo-hyung was furious. He had seen Jamie taken right in front of him and felt powerless to stop it. He tried to follow, but his men held him back, fearing for his safety. Just as he began to break free, his mother, Hoya, intervened. Her commanding voice echoed through the halls, silencing Yo-hyung's protests. With one sharp glare, she ordered him to return to his room, and, defeated, he obeyed. But his heart burned with determination to find Jamie and bring her back. Haejo brought Jamie to a small, quiet neighborhood. He told her they needed to get her new clothes, but she saw it as an opportunity to escape. The moment they exited the car, she ran down the street shouting for help. To her frustration, no one answered. The streets were eerily empty, and she soon realized why. A popular idol concert had drawn everyone away. Desperate, Jamie spotted an elderly man and ran to him, hoping for assistance. But he scolded her, called her crazy, and left. Left with no choice, she reluctantly followed Haejo into a clothing store. Inside, she noticed the shopkeeper's phone and asked to borrow it under the pretense of checking something. She took it to the changing room and frantically dialed Yu-hyung's number, only to forget it in her panic. Outside, Haejo waited patiently, even trying on some clothes to pass the time. The shopkeeper, clearly impressed by his physique, couldn't help but stare as he casually changed. Meanwhile, Jamie's memory returned, and she finally left a message for Yo-hyung, reminding him of their promise and asking him to save her. But as she stepped out, Haejo returned the phone to the shopkeeper, making her blush with embarrassment. On the way out, Jamie clutched her wedding dress tightly, silently praying that Yo-hyung would find her. As if by fate, Yo-hyung was at the mansion, desperately searching for his phone. When he finally found it, he saw the missed call and read her message. Without hesitation, he set out to rescue her, even defying his mother's terrifying authority. Determined, he promised himself he would find her no matter what. Meanwhile, Haejo and Jamie arrived at a small sausage soup restaurant. The owner initially turned them away, saying they were closed. But Haejo, putting on a convincing act, explained that he had driven 6 hours just so his pregnant wife could enjoy the dish she was craving. Touched, the owner relented and went into the kitchen to prepare the meal. Jamie was confused by Haejo's willingness to play along with her fake pregnancy, but he whispered for her to endure it for the time being. When the food arrived, Jamie acted the part of a loving wife, eating 2 bowls and claiming it was for the baby. The owner asked about her pregnancy, and Jamie, without thinking, mentioned that Haejo wasn't the father. Haejo kicked her under the table, trying to stop her from saying too much. When Haejo gets to know that the owner has a stroke, he thinks about the mission he is on, about finding his biological father. He takes 1 strand of the owner's hair by telling there is something on his hair and puts it in his pocket. After the meal, Haejo pretended he had forgotten his wallet and asked if they could stay the night. The owner, moved by their supposed situation, agreed without hesitation. That night, Haejo and Jamie lay on the floor beside each other. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts and questions. Haejo wondered why Jamie didn't ask him what he was doing or why she stayed. He concluded bitterly that she probably didn't care anymore. Behind her falling asleep, Haejo reminded Jamie to abandon her hopes of being rescued and warned her not to make any reckless moves. But as he drifted off, Jamie quietly got up and tried to sneak out. Her footsteps were soft, but in his dreams, Haejo murmured, begging her not to leave. His expression was so pitiful that Jamie hesitated. She walked back to him, her heart conflicted, and gently took his hand, unsure of what to do next. Years earlier, when Haejo was delivering goods for work on his motorbike, he found himself in the middle of a terrible car accident. The collision left him injured, and the goods he was transporting were damaged beyond repair. As he stood up, clutching his side in pain, the driver of the other vehicle stepped out. Haejo froze. The man standing before him wasn't just anyone. It was his father, the man who had abandoned him years ago. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Haejo's father looked stunned, unable to believe that the boy he had left behind was now a grown man standing right in front of him. The awkward silence was broken when the man's wife was yelling about their young daughter being injured in the accident. Torn between the past and the present, the man handed Haejo his business card, which read, Kongju, CEO, before hurrying back to his family. The words he added, I'm your father, only made Haejo laugh bitterly. Before the man could drive off, Haejo pulled out a business card, one from his odd jobs company, and introduced himself with his new name. He watched his father leave, feeling an overwhelming mixture of anger and emptiness. In the present, Jamie's hesitant hand brought Haejo back to reality. He opened his eyes, catching her just as she was about to pull away. Without thinking, he grabbed her hand and gently pushed her onto the floor. Their faces were suddenly so close that Jamie could feel his breath. She squirmed, trying to get free, but the intensity of the moment froze her in place. Haejo leaned in slightly, and she didn't flinch, expecting a kiss, but instead he whispered something in her ear. The next thing Jamie knew, she was tied to a table, the ropes tight enough to keep her from escaping again. Nearby, Haejo sat with a smug grin, casually snapping a picture of her struggling, as if it were a joke. For keepsakes, he teased, laughing at her frustration. Later, while washing his face, Haejo found himself distracted by the thought of how Jamie had closed her eyes earlier. Did she really expect him to kiss her? His phone interrupted his thoughts with a call from a company named Perfect Gene. The name brought him back to his mission. He handed over a strand of hair and a wad of cash to a courier, requesting the paternity test results by morning. It emerged that the doctor had given Haejo a list of 5 potential fathers, with a 20% chance of finding his biological father. It wasn't the worst odds he had faced. That night, Haejo wandered past a restaurant and saw 2 brothers arguing loudly over their inheritance. Their shouting echoed through the quiet street, but Haejo just stood there, watching. Meanwhile, inside the room where Jamie was tied up, she screamed for help, but the elderly owner of the house was fast asleep, oblivious to her cries. Frustrated, Jamie realized no one was coming to save her. So determined, she began dragging the table across the room until the ropes snapped. Just as she thought she was free, the door opened, and there stood Haejo, grinning as if he'd expected this all along. I should have recorded this, he laughed. Making her situation feel even more humiliating, Jamie shot back, reminding him that what he was doing was kidnapping, and that he could face serious jail time. She warned him about Yu Hyung's powerful mother, who could make his life a living hell. But Haejo wasn't fazed. He brushed off her threats and instead brought up their past. The argument grew heated as Jamie accused him of pushing her away when they were together. She told him she hadn't wanted to leave but thought he would stop her. Her words hung in the air like an open wound. Embarrassed, she quickly crawled under a blanket, hiding her face. But Haejo wasn't ready to let it go. He leaned over, asking for the blanket back, his voice oddly gentle. Once he retrieved the blanket, he turned on the TV and stretched out on the floor. Jamie demanded he turn it off, but he ignored her, saying he needed a nap. When she tried to argue, he playfully suggested they play a word chain game, or even continue the kiss she thought was coming earlier. His teasing only frustrated her further. As Jamie lay in silence, staring at the back of his head, memories began to flood her mind. She thought of the first time they met. Haejo had been injured, bleeding heavily, and she had been the one to point him toward a hospital. She had even torn a handkerchief to bandage his wound. The next day, he returned to give the handkerchief back. He smiled so brightly, complimenting her unusual name, and at that moment she felt something stir in her heart. It was the beginning of everything. Elsewhere, Yu-hong's mother, Hoya, remained calm despite the chaos. When her staff rushed to tell her that her son had left the house in pursuit of Jae-mi, she showed no concern. She already knew he wouldn't sit idle. Watching from a window, she saw his car pull out of the driveway, the gas tank already filled for his journey. Lee Hyung, meanwhile, was speaking to the police. He recounted the entire incident, showing them a sketch of Haejo and describing his condition, but officers did not seem to take him seriously. They speculated that Jae-mi might have run away for love, especially since Haejo was undeniably more handsome. Their comments only fueled Yu Hyung's anger, but he convinced them to print a notice for the missing person. Later, as Haejo paid the bill at the restaurant where they had eaten, he asked for a new pair of slippers. Jae-mi's embroidered shoes, the ones she had cherished, had been tossed onto the roof in a fit of frustration. It was just another moment of chaos in a night that seemed far from over. The owner offered him food before leaving. While eating, Jae-mi noticed her missing shoe and questioned Haejo about it. He didn't respond, instead continuing to eat calmly as if nothing was wrong. Before she could press him further, the restaurant manager arrived to finalize a franchise agreement with the family. Meanwhile, the daughter-in-law pulled her father inside to inspect the meat so that he could not listen to what the manager was saying. A heated discussion followed when the brothers began arguing about whether to sell the property. Their voices grew louder, and Haejo, unable to contain himself, stepped in. He casually suggested he might be one of their father's lost children and asked if he could get a share of the inheritance. His comment caused a stir, with the brothers turning their anger toward him. Haejo exposed their fake displays of family loyalty, pointing out how they only cared about the money. This sparked a physical fight, with the brothers lunging at Haejo. The manager, terrified by the escalating chaos, tried to flee. In his panic, he caught a glimpse of Haejo's face and realized it matched the one on the missing person flyer. The situation became more tense when Yu Hyung rushed into the restaurant, determined to take Jae-mi back. By this time, Haejo was fighting off the brothers single-handedly, his quick reflexes keeping him ahead. Angry, the old man of the family, unable to watch the mess any longer, began scolding everyone. Meanwhile, outside the restaurant, Chil Seung's gang had arrived, armed and ready to confront Haejo. To make matters worse, the police were also on their way after being alerted to the fight. Sensing the danger, Jae-mi pretended to have a stomachache, clutching her side and groaning loudly. Her performance distracted everyone long enough for Haejo to grab her and make their escape. The old man, moved by her act, waved them off and even let them go without paying the bill. As they reached the door, Haejo paused. He turned back and warned the old man that his grandchildren were tricking him, hoping to take his property. But the old man admitted he already knew. "I'm not deaf," he said calmly, "and I don't need an outsider to interfere." At that moment, Haejo's phone buzzed with a text, the DNA test results. He looked at the message that said the old man wasn't related to him. Without another word, he left. Hae-mi spotted Yu Hyung approaching and tried to break free, but Haeju grabbed her arm and pulled her away. Hyu pointed behind them. Chil Sung's gang stormed into the restaurant, demanding to know where Haejo was. The old man, unfazed, stood his ground and fought them off with a sausage, swinging it like a weapon. The chaos became even more absurd when the police arrived, catching everyone mid-fight. Aeu Hyung seized the moment, borrowing a police car under the pretense of helping with the case. He nervously explained his identity and promised to return the car soon. Back at the mansion, Hoya received the news of her son's reckless actions and was livid. She threatened to throw him to the tigers for bringing such humiliation to their family. She immediately called Lining, demanding that someone return to Korea to handle the situation. While the chase was on, Aeu-hyung drove after Haejo and Jae-mi, desperate to catch up. Jae-mi struggled to stop Haejo, but her efforts were in vain. The pursuit continued until they reached the edge of a cliff. In a desperate move, Aeu-hyung rammed his car into Haejo's, sending it tumbling down the slope. The crash left everyone shaken. Haejo emerged from the wreckage with a splitting headache, struggling to stay conscious. So Jae-mi was torn between helping him and going to Yu Hyung, who had accidentally shot himself in the leg with a stun gun he didn't know how to use. Both men were incapacitated, leaving Jae-mi caught between them, unsure of what to do. At the police station, Chil Seung's gang tried to defend themselves, claiming they hadn't caused the destruction at the restaurant, but the police weren't convinced, having witnessed them swinging their arms and legs wildly during the fight. When the gang leader insisted the old man had attacked him with a sausage, the officers couldn't make sense of how such a weapon could cause so much damage. Frustrated, they locked the whole group. Hyung woke up later only to learn that Jae-mi was missing. A mysterious person named Jana had come to see him, but his focus remained on finding Jae-mi. Elsewhere, Hae-jo woke up alone in a quiet field. He spotted Jae-mi sitting in the distance, her figure still and solemn. He approached her cautiously, holding out a small flower as a gesture of peace. But Jae-mi pushed him away, her voice firm. Her schlep seemed shaken by earth-shattering. There came a slow beat. She told him they couldn't keep going like this, that one of them needed to disappear for the tangled fates to finally be untied. Her words were laced with pain as she confessed her misery and begged for freedom. Hae-jo, his face unreadable, nodded slowly. "If that's what you want," he said softly, "I'll grant your wish." He promised to leave her alone, but not until his time came. As long as he was alive, he wouldn't let her go, because, to him, she was his. Meanwhile, a flashback revealed the moment Yoo Hyung's determination had clashed with his mother's authority. Kneeling in the rain, refusing food or water, he had protested against his family's disapproval of Jae-mi. Hoya was livid. The family had spent 2 years planning the wedding, but her son was ready to throw it all away for a girl he'd only known for 2 months. Her anger boiled over, and she yelled at him to strip off all his clothes if he was so willing to discard his dignity. Jomi had watched him from a distance, rain pouring down her face. She couldn't bear to see him suffer any longer. Just as he reached for his waistband, she ran to him and hugged him tightly. Tears mixed with the rain as she begged him to stop. "Please, give up on me," she begged, but Yoo Hyung refused. His love for her was unwavering. He asked her one question: "Will you promise never to leave me?" Jae-mi, overwhelmed and desperate to end his suffering, nodded. Without hesitation, Yoo Hyung turned to his stunned mother and announced that Jae-mi was 2 months pregnant. The lie left Hoya speechless, but it also strengthened Jae-mi's place in their family, at least for the time being. Back in the present, Jae-mi found herself torn between the 2 men in her life. Both Hae-jo and Woo Hyung were unconscious, and she had to act quickly before the police arrived. Holding Woo Hyung's hand, she remembered the promises she had made to him, but Hae-jo's words echoed in her mind. He had loved her even after learning the truth about her condition. It was a love that had no conditions, no expectations. With a heavy heart, she helped Hae-jo escape. The two stood near the water, silence stretching between them. Hae-jo, his voice low and steady, told Jae-mi that he would die. The words hit her like a wave, leaving her unsure of what to say. When she pressed him for an explanation, he simply replied, "If it's what you want, I'll leave this world happy." Jae-mi's emotions boiled over. Determined to free herself, she considered throwing him into the water, but even as she struggled with the idea, Hae-jo remained calm. "Why is it," he asked softly, "that life only gets exciting when I'm so close to dying?" Later, Jae-mi found herself standing outside the police station, her heart heavy with indecision. Inside, Ae-hyung was frantically pleading with the police to find her. They, however, dismissed his pleas, refusing to investigate further. Just as he was about to give up, Jae-mi made a call to his phone. The moment Yoo Hyung answered, his voice betrayed his shock and relief. "Jae-mi?" he shouted, loud enough for the police to notice. The officer sprang into action, tracing the call to a nearby payphone. But when they arrived, Jae-mi had hidden behind a parked car, tears streaming down her face. She had hung up the phone the moment Hae-jo appeared, her feelings a tangled mess of fear and longing. As the night wore on, Jae-mi and Hae-jo found themselves in a small restaurant sharing drinks. The atmosphere was subdued, almost somber. Jae-mi finally opened up, confessing that she had entered Yoo Hyung's prestigious family for wealth and stability. But as the wedding approached, she became terrified of being the one to take away Yoo Hyung's happiness. "I could have stayed," she admitted, "but what if I became the source of their misfortune?" Hae-jo listened quietly before responding. "Some people," he said, "are born into misfortune, like number 137. His words carried the weight of his own painful past, a reminder that life's hardships weren't always a choice. Meanwhile, at the police station, Hoya was calling in every favor she had, pleading with the authorities to help her son. She insisted that Yoo Hyung, her gentle and kind boy, would never act recklessly. Her frustration mounted as the officers seemed indifferent to her appeal. Yoo Hyung, however, was far from giving up. Still in his prison clothes, he demanded action, clinging to the police station like it was his only hope. Even the thugs from Chilsong's gang, locked up nearby, cheered him on, encouraging him to fight for justice. Suddenly, a tall man entered the station, carrying Yoo Hyung like a rag doll. It was John Na, the family's trusted enforcer. He whisked Yoo Hyung away, determined to bring order to the chaos. But Yoo Hyung's mind was elsewhere, consumed by his need to find Jae-mi. Back at the restaurant, Jae-mi and Hae-jo continued their conversation. Jae-mi confessed that she felt completely lost, unsure of where her life was headed. Hae-jo, in his usual nonchalant manner, told her not to set any goals. "If you don't have a destination," he explained, "you can't get lost. You'll just drift, like I do." Jae-mi was unimpressed. She accused him of sounding like a cult leader or someone mentally unhinged. Frustrated, she stormed out of the restaurant, but Haejo quickly followed, trying to convince her to stay over. Meanwhile, John Na had given Yu-hung detailed information about Haejo. The revelations left Yu-hung deeply disturbed. He discovered that Jamie had lied about her connection to Haejo, claiming they were siblings from an orphanage. The photos of the two together, smiling and carefree, filled him with doubt. And yet, despite his confusion, he tore the documents. He didn't want his mother to see them, knowing it would only add to her anger. Determined to act, Yu-young attempted to steal a car, but it wouldn't start. Surprisingly, John Na threw him the keys, offering to join him in retrieving Jae-mi. The gesture reignited his resolve, and together they set off into the night. The next morning, Haejo and Jae-mi arrived at a train station. Haejo handed her a ticket, a jacket, and a warm drink. He spoke softly, telling her they would buy better clothes when they reached Busan. His tone was gentle, almost tender, as if he were trying to make up for all the chaos he had caused. On the train, they sat side by side, eating and sharing small portions of food. The air between them felt lighter for once, though neither could forget the turmoil they had left behind. As they ate, Jae-mi suddenly noticed a baby being held by its father. She froze, unable to tear her eyes away. Haejo followed her gaze, and his expression softened. Seeing the baby reminded him of his own happy childhood before it all fell apart. For the first time, he opened up to Jae-mi about his father. She listened intently, surprised because he had never mentioned his family before. He told her his biological father had been a sperm donor, a man who unknowingly brought him into this crazy world. He explained that out of 5 potential candidates, one had already been ruled out, and he was on his way to finding the next. Me, confused, asked why he was so determined. Haejo gave her a bittersweet smile and compared it to finishing a summer school assignment. His summer vacation was almost over, and this was the last thing he needed to complete. Later, Haejo went to the bathroom, leaving Jae-mi alone in their seats. Moments passed, and then many more. Growing concerned, she knocked on the bathroom door repeatedly, but there was no response. Inside, Haejo was struggling as his illness flared up again. Pills had spilled onto the floor, and he had vomited, leaving him weak and pale. It took him a long time to regain his composure before he finally emerged. Jae-mi noticed the scattered pills and asked why he had fainted. Haejo deflected with a joking remark about Yu-hyung being the cause of his head injury. By the time they reached Busan, John Na had already received a tip about their location. He immediately dragged a distracted Yu-hyung onto a bus, urging him to move quickly. Meanwhile, Haejo and Jae-mi wandered through Busan's streets, stopping to shop for clothes. They laughed and joked, momentarily forgetting their worries. Afterwards, Haejo pulled out a suitcase full of money, treating the day like an adventure. For a fleeting moment, it felt as if they were rekindling their relationship. But reality crept back in when Haejo received a warning message from Yu Ji-ho. The gang was tracking him and planned to kill him. Haejo smashed his phone in frustration, trying to push the danger out of his mind. He called Ju-ri, or as he teasingly referred to her, Bong-suk, to check on Yu Gi-ho. He learned that the henchmen worked for Chil-seong, and he asked Bong-suk to keep an eye on them. While Haejo was trying to enjoy the day, Yu Gi-ho was facing his own life-or-death situation. Tied to train tracks by the gang leader, he was forced to choose between loyalty to Chil-seong and his own life. The train approached, and though it managed to stop in time, the ordeal left Yu Ji-ho so terrified that he wet his pants. He knew he had to find Haejo if he wanted to survive. Haejo and Jae-mi soon arrived in a mountainous region to meet the second candidate. The man they found was rough and cold at first, but Jae-mi's playful and genuine approach seemed to soften him. When she explained their bizarre mission to find the father of a sperm donor, the man cracked a smile, calling it interesting. Haejo felt a flicker of hope. The man revealed that he had donated his sperm years ago to pay off debts. As they talked, Jae-mi managed to coax him into dancing the tango with her, lightening the mood further. But Haejo quickly interrupted, steering the conversation back to the purpose of their visit. He asked the man if he had ever been married. The man admitted that he used to hit his wife when he was younger and she had left him long ago. He had no children, but he joked that Haejo might be his son. SME, ever resourceful, introduced a 24/7 on-site DNA testing service. Soon after, a frustrated courier arrived, exhausted from climbing the mountain. He grumbled about the inconvenience, but Haejo handed over a sample and left decades. Meanwhile, Jae-mi struck up a conversation with the man. He casually mentioned his failed brain surgery at a pharmaceutical company and how it had driven him to abandon his life and retreat to the mountains. He then asked Jae-mi if she liked his son yet, teasing her gently. He added that he wouldn't mind having a cheerful daughter-in-law like her, making Jae-mi blush and stammer in denial. Haejo, unable to get a signal on his phone, wandered back into the house. He found Jae-mi laughing with the man, and for a moment he felt a flicker of warmth. a sense of family that he hadn't experienced in years. Later that evening, Jamie explained why she had laughed earlier. She had seen a sprout growing on a potato and commented, "Even potatoes have children, but I don't." The man joked in response that even mushrooms are named after their cultivators, but Heijo didn't know his origins. The lighthearted exchange made her laugh until tears formed in her eyes. Seeing her laughter turn to sadness, Heijo gently told her it was okay to cry. At first she resisted, but the weight of everything overwhelmed her and she broke down. As her tears fell, Heijo tried to comfort her. When she asked what he was doing, he replied with a small smile, "I'm just a mushroom cuddling a potato." Jamie managed a small smirk through her tears before breaking down again. Heijo's own emotions caught up with him as he watched her cry. His illness flared up at that moment, but he fought to stay composed. Despite everything, they both found solace in their shared pain, knowing their struggles weren't so different after all. That night, Jamie stared at the stars through the window of their small room, her thoughts drifting to her childhood. She had always dreamed of being a mother, hoping to give the love she had never received. Growing up in an orphanage, she had tried to be the best version of herself. Cheerful, beautiful, and obedient, just to be chosen by a mother. But time and again, she was left behind. Her childhood dream of becoming a mother had been mocked by friends, and ultimately extinguished by Heijo, who once told her only those who knew parental love could truly give it. Now, in the present, Jamie whispered that he had been right all along. She looked at him and asked for his blessing, her voice tinged with vulnerability. She wanted him to sing her a song, claiming his words were as prophetic as a prayer. At first, Heijo refused, teasing her for being so sentimental, but her quiet persistence won him over. As she drifted off to sleep, he softly hummed a melody, his voice carrying a bittersweet note. Meanwhile, Yo-hyung and his bodyguard found themselves in a seedy part of town after a mix-up with the GPS. They ended up in a neighborhood full of call girls, leaving Yo-hyung blushing and stuttering as he tried to escape the awkward situation. Their next stop wasn't much better, a love motel equipped with every romantic cliché imaginable. The embarrassment only deepened when they overheard a woman shouting for help in the next room. The bodyguard, unable to ignore the commotion, punched the wall as a warning, startling everyone into silence. Later, the bodyguard handed Yoo-hyung information about Yoo Ji-ho and his connection to Chil-sung's gang. Yoo-hyung was frustrated and confused, wondering why Heijo was traveling to remote locations and dragging Jae-mi along with him. Meanwhile, Yoo Ji-ho, tied up and bruised, confessed everything he knew about Heijo's bizarre words and actions, hoping for leniency. As he sat in silence, his phone buzzed with an unknown number, but he ignored it, too used to clients pestering him at odd hours. Back in the mountains, Heijo suddenly collapsed, his illness triggering a seizure. He frantically searched for his medication, only to have the uncle appear with the pills in hand. The older man had been waiting, as if anticipating the moment Heijo would need him. After calming down, the uncle invited him to visit the seafood market together. At the market, the uncle held Heijo's hand as they browsed the stalls. The simple gesture brought back memories of Heijo's childhood when he had walked hand in hand with his father. The uncle, brimming with pride, introduced Heijo to the fishmonger as his son, boasting that he had inherited his good looks. He enthusiastically ordered enough seafood to feed a small army, as though preparing for a grand feast. But when it came time to pay, he realized he didn't have enough money. The fishmonger, unimpressed, began yelling at him. Before things could escalate, Heijo stepped in and paid for the food. This only angered the uncle, who argued with the vendor, declaring that he had been preparing for this trip all morning and was finally trying to be a father. The two men ended up in a full-blown argument, much to the amusement of onlookers. After the chaos, they retreated to a noodle shop, where the uncle lamented his inability to treat Heijo to the seafood feast he deserved. Over bowls of noodles, the uncle began asking questions about Heijo's life, learning about the struggles that had shaped him. He patted Heijo's head gently, offering words of encouragement that Heijo hadn't heard in years. The simple gesture brought tears to Havjo's eyes. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel the warmth of a father's love, however fleeting. Elsewhere, Jamie searched the house, growing increasingly anxious when she couldn't find anyone. She checked the bag of money they had been carrying, relieved to see it was still there. But the sight of the bag only deepened her unease. She realized she was terrified of being left alone, even by a man she claimed to hate. Impulsively, she grabbed the bag and decided to leave. Walking through the woods at night, Jae-mi stumbled over roots and scratched her arms on low-hanging branches. She looked up at the starry sky, feeling lost and aimless. Heijo's words echoed in her mind. Don't set goals. If life is about wandering, then it's not aimless, it's free. The uncle, drunk from the evening's events, began speaking openly to Heijo. He revealed he had known about his own terminal cancer for years, which allowed him to recognize Heijo's condition. Heijo's anger flared at the mention of his secret, but the uncle's tone remained sincere. He asked if Jae-mi knew about Haejo's illness, and, seeing his reaction, quickly reassured him. I care about you like my own son. I just want to help. When Haejo tried to leave, the uncle ran after him, shouting that he would give anything to help, even offering to cut off his arm if that's what Haejo needed. His voice cracked with desperation, and for a moment, Haejo stood still, the weight of the man's words sinking in. But he turned away, too overwhelmed to respond, leaving the uncle standing alone under the stars. In the luxury of a high-end hotel, Yoo Ji-ho was nervously giving Chil-sung a massage when his phone buzzed with a strange call. Ready to snap at the caller, his tone shifted when the name Chae Sung-yak came up. The shameless man who had kidnapped Chil-sung's bride was connected to Haejo. It suddenly clicked that Sung-yak and Haejo were the same person. Alarmed, Yoo Gi-ho called Bong-suk, their fiery landlady, in the middle of the night. Annoyed, she hung up the moment he mentioned Haejo, refusing to get involved in his chaos. Haejo, meanwhile, returned to the mountain house to find Jae-mi missing from her bed.